Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 1 Minute Breakdowns. You guys already know how this goes, and for those who don't, we're gonna try and break down each fight on the card in a minute or less. If you guys haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And I say let's get right into this. So just get the screen up. Cool. Starting off with the first fight of the evening, we have Priscilla Cachoeira against Sajara Eubanks. Priscilla Cachoeira is the stand-up fighter in this fight. She's going to be more likely to want to keep this on the feet. Sajara is going to be leaning more towards her grappling, but the main issue I have with Sajara is that she is someone who tends to gas out pretty quickly if things don't go her way, just due to her fight style. I would lean pass, but also, I like Sajara's ground game. I'm gonna say Sajara wins this fight via submission in round number two. And if this gets to round number three, I think Priscilla Cachoeira ends up winning this fight. But let's go ahead and go on to the next fight. Um, Technical difficulties. I apologize, my friends. Let's just get these all up. Next fight, we have Jimmy Flick against Charles Johnson. Jimmy Flick making his UFC return after a short, brief retirement of a year and 11 months. Charles Johnson, who arguably lost his last fight, did not look too impressive. Johnson's going to have a 2-inch height advantage. Both of these fighters, similar to the last fight, are of two different styles. Jimmy Flick is more of a grappling submission threat guy kind of guy, has some crazy submission wins over the likes of Cody Durden, Flying Triangle, which you don't really see all that often. And then you have Charles Johnson, who's more of a stand-up fighter. Before the UFC, he'd tend to be a finisher. Um, I like Charles Johnson in this fight. I'm not laying that price tag, that's for sure. It's a little bit too hefty for my liking. I think Charles Johnson is able to get this done after a hairy first round, and he'll get it done inside the distance with his striking. So give me Charles Johnson. Next up, we have Dan Argueta against Nick Aguirre. Nick Aguirre is stepping up on short notice due to Bulgarian being pulled out of the fight. So let's break this down. Nick Aguirre is a similar fighter to Isaac Bulgarian. Really solid front choke game. Front choke series is perfect. The guillotines, rear naked chokes are slick as well. 7-0 in his career. He's going to be the taller fighter, 2 inches, but I just think Dan Argueta has the experience that will outweigh any of the advantages Nick might have on the ground. And I think Dan Argueta's boxing is a little bit more slick. So I think Argueta gets this done eventually inside the distance. I'm going to call it round three knockout for Argueta. I think the price tag is a little bit too wide, so I'm not betting this myself. Next up, we have Alan Nascimento going against Carlos Hernandez. Alan Nascimento coming out of Shoot Box, the primary gym for Charles Oliveira. He is going to have a 2.5-inch reach advantage here against Carlos Hernandez. Another fighter where Nascimento is more known for his grappling and Carlos Hernandez is more known for his striking. So if this goes to the ground, I think it's Alan Nascimento all the way. Even though Carlos Hernandez has some slick ground submission defense and get up game, I think Nascimento is going to be able to drown him with control time due to the fact that Carlos Hernandez gives up a lot of control time and gets taken down quite a bit. Now, I don't rate Nascimento's takedown offense all that well, but I do think he gets it done here against Carlos Hernandez by unanimous decision. Let's go ahead and move on to the next fight, and I'll load the next couple as well while we're at it. I should have had these loaded before. Next fight, we have Mateus Mendonça against Javid Basharat. Javid Basharat has blasted on the UFC scene, similar to how Mendoza is going to try and blast onto the scene through the Contender Series. Javid is a very slick striker, uses his speed to his advantage, and has proven that he can get people down to the ground and he can control them and use his ground game with some nasty ground and pound, like we've seen over the past couple fights, especially in the Tony Gravely fight. That was some really nice ground and pound. 13-0. Both fighters are undefeated, actually. We have Javid, who's going to be at a 3-inch height advantage, but he will be at a 2.5-inch reach disadvantage. Mateus Mendonca's very powerful striking, very fast on his feet. But the one thing that I noticed in his tape is that he does not like being pressured. When he's pressured, he tends to leave his hands down because he's anxious, I believe. And I've seen that happen throughout the gym, throughout my time training. So I like Javid a lot in this spot. The price tag is pretty high at minus 350, but I think he's a safe parlay piece. But I would not be surprised if Mateus Mendonça has some moments on the feet and hurts Javid. But I think Javid is just a faster fighter, the more skilled striker, and will be able to utilize his ground game very efficiently here. So give me Javid Bashara convincingly. Next up, this fight's not going to surprise a lot of people with this breakdown. We have Mateus Rebecki against Nick Fior. Nick Fior is making his debut. Mateus Rebecki is making his debut, but the biggest difference is that Mateus Rebecki has fought some very high-level people on the regional scene. I'm talking about some high-level Russian wrestlers from the Russian regional scene, whereas Nick Fior only has 6 pro fights. I do think that Mateus Rebecki is going to be the stronger fighter. He's going to be the more powerful hitter when it comes to the striking, but I think he's going to get this done in the first round via ground and pound knockout. Rebecki is someone who's going to be looking for the takedowns early and often, and I believe that he'll be able to get this done nice and early in that first round. Nick Fiore is a decent striker, but we haven't seen much of his ground game. His tape has been a little bit harder to find for most. So give me Mateus Rebecki convincingly. Obviously, this is not a surprise to most. It's a minus 730 favorite here. Next up, another fight where it's been the talk of the town this week on the Twitter space. We have Abdulrazak Al Hassan versus Claudio Ribeiro. Abdulrazak Al Hassan is the UFC vet here, but is on a bit of a losing skid. He's won 1 of his last 5 fights, so not too convincing in terms of past results, recent results. And then we have Claudio Ribeiro, 10-2, 5 wins in his last 5 fights, and he will be the taller fighter here at a 3-inch height advantage, and then he also has the 4-inch reach advantage here, which is going to serve really well for him, especially in a fight where I feel like these guys are just going to stand and bang. Now, although I do think Abdulrazak Al Hassan could utilize his wrestling, we saw it in his last fight, but I just think Claudio Ribeiro finds the chin and shuts Abdulrazak Al Hassan off early and often in the first round. We've seen this guy on the Contender Series shut the lights off, and we heard how hard that punch was. I would not want to be on the other side, on the receiving end of those punches. Very slick striker. If this fight does get to the mat, I do think Abdulrazak Al Hassan has the advantage there. So this is more of a coin flip type of fight in betting wise, but I do think Claudio Ribeiro has the tools, has the power to get this done early and often. So give me Claudio Ribeiro. I have not bet this yet, but on the fence, on the fence. Now, a fight where I don't really agree with the line. We have Umar Nurmagomedov against Raoni Barcelos. Raoni Barcelos, in his own right, is very, very good on the ground. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. His father is a coral belt, which is an 8th degree black belt, and very, very skilled grappler. Yes, he's on the older side at 35 years old. Umar Nurmagomedov, we know what his game plan is. It's take this fight down to the ground, utilize the ground and pound, utilize submission threats, but I just don't think it's going to work all that often against Raoni. I do think Omar wins via decision, but at this price, I'm going to have to take Raoni Barcelos. He's approaching the plus 700 range, and it would be almost criminal if I did not take a shot on Raoni, given the experience that he has in the octagon, given that he's a credentialed grappler, and that's the primary focus of Umar Nurmagomedov's game. I just think that this might be a little bit of a big ask at minus 700 to minus 800 for Umar. So give me Raoni as a bet, but Umar is probably going to win this fight. Now, let's go ahead and load up these next couple fights. We have Ketlin Vieira against Raquel Pennington. Ketlin Vieira is the minus 115 favorite as I last checked on the betting odds. Now, both of these fighters, I wouldn't say have similar games. They're both somewhat bruisers. Pennington likes to keep this along the cage and utilize her pocket boxing, whereas Ketlin Vieira is all around. Like, her boxing looked much improved against Holly Holm, and then her takedown game is drowning. Like, she can get decent amount of control time as long as she's able to land these takedowns. She does have some questionable IQ at times, but I do think ultimately she gets Rocky down to the floor and controls her on the mat, utilizing some submission threats, and ultimately gets the submission here in this fight against Raquel Pennington in the second round. I think Ketlen Vieira's pressure and size is just a little bit too much for Rocky, who I feel like is teetering on a bit of a cliff here. She's been on a nice 4-fight win streak, but very close fights. And I just rate the ground game of Ketlen Vieira that much. I was one of the people who backed her against Holly Holm as a plus 200 favorite, underdog. And I will go back to the well here, and I have 2 units on Ketlen Vieira in this fight. Next up, we have Punahele Soriano against Roman Kopylov. Roman Kopylov was on a 2-fight losing streak before he knocked out Alessio Di Chirico, who, by the way, Alessio Di Chirico was putting on some work against him in that first round, which is a bad look for a fighter who is retiring. And then you have Puna Soriano, who is known to be a very high-level power puncher, getting the matchup that he finally wants. He's fought wrestlers in his past 2 fights in the UFC, and quite frankly, the UFC did him dirty there. Puna Soriano is known to be a knockout artist, and I think he is getting exactly what he wants here in this fight against Roman Kopylov. And given that both fighters are around the same height, only at a 1-inch reach of disadvantage, and a 2.5-inch reach, height, and then 2.5-inch reach disadvantage for Puna, it's going to be a lot closer in the pocket. And I think Puna ultimately finds the chin of Roman Kopylov, whether it be in the first or second round. I think he gets the finish here. His power is going to be a little bit too much for Kopylov, who tends to keep his hands down when he's boxing and does not have any takedown threat at all. So I already have Puna Soriano moneyline locked in, and I have some finish props locked in on Prize Picks and Underdog Fantasy. All in on Puna here. Co-main event of the evening, we have Dan Ige against Damon Jackson. Fellow friend of the show, Damon Jackson, who we've interviewed before, is going to be the grappler in this grappler versus striker matchup. And I have to go with the grappler, even though Damon Jackson has not faced the level of competition that Dan Ige has faced. Damon Jackson is a very high-level wrestler and grappler. And they don't call him the leech for no reason. He stays on you. And when he gets you down, it's going to be a little bit tough to get back up. And we've seen Dan Ige get controlled, especially in his last fight against Movsar Evloev. It's going to be pretty tough to get up from Damon Jackson. Now, my issue with Damon Jackson here is his striking defense is not what we like to see against someone in the regards of Dan Ige, who is a very, very respected striker in his own right. Has some dynamite in his hands and can hit pretty hard. Damon Jackson has been rocked in a couple of his fights, and that's the biggest fear here for Damon Jackson backers, but also for Dan Ige backers. Your fear is getting taken down constantly. So I'm staying away from this fight, but I have to go with Damon Jackson as the pick because I have to stick with the more credentialed grappler against someone whose takedown defense is just poor. So give me Damon Jackson in this fight. I'm very close to betting Damon Jackson. Last but not least, we have the main event of the evening. And guys, I am so glad that I'm doing this breakdown a little bit later on in the week because a bunch of these fights got canceled, rebooked, rescheduled, or just a completely different opponent. So I'm very thankful. But main event of the evening, we have Sean Strickland against Nasruddin Imavov. Both of these guys are fighters at the middleweight division, but they'll be fighting at light heavyweight due to Sean Strickland joining in on short notice here. So Imavov is not your typical Dagestani fighter who usually leans towards the wrestling. He's a very high-level striker, and we saw again in his last fight against Juan Keegan Buckley where he just pieced him up for those first 2 rounds. Third round did look hairy, looked like he was starting to gas out a little bit, but I don't put too much stock into, oh, the gas tank is shot. I think he just unloaded the tank in those first 2 rounds and then tried to cruise in the third, which hopefully he doesn't do here because this is a 5-round fight. And then you have Sean Strickland, who 3 weeks ago ate 147 strikes, I want to say, from Jared Cannonier, one of the harder hitting middleweights in the division, who knows how like mentally recovered he is from losing that close decision. That's one thing, and just from all those shots. Jared Cannonier has some power on him. I ultimately lean Nasruddin Imavov here. I'm not betting this fight. Um, at the minus 110 odds, you gotta go with the person who's had a full camp to prepare for, the person who is, in my opinion, the better striker and the more dynamic striker, and has some finish potential. Sean Strickland's probably just gonna go and try to jab him out, but I actually think Imavov might be able to finish him just due to Sean Strickland fighting 3 weeks ago and taking all that damage. I like Imavov's also ability to take the fight down to the ground and utilize his ground game. So ultimately, I lean with Nasruddin Imavov just due to the sheer fact that he's more prepared, in my opinion, and he already did his weight cut for the most part. Going back to 205, he might have to gain a couple pounds to get there. But yeah, guys, hopefully you enjoyed the show. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Helps the channel out a ton. And I know this show seemed a little bit off the rails with all the fight changes and the mix-ups, but we prepared to the best of our capabilities here, and we're looking forward to this one. Other than that,